Hey, good morning, everybody. It's Julie Hamilton. How are you doing today? I hope you're doing great, and we are near the weekend, so hallelujah, you almost made it. Well, this is simple tips to build a strong and healthy life on. So you might wonder, why are you talking about dyslexia? I'm talking about it because it's a part of my everyday life, and I've been consulting a lot for parents of struggling readers lately, and I want to share with you some of the things that we talk about in our discussions, because as we've talked about them, I've started to realize these are common things that people need to know about. And so one of the things that I think people need to know about, whether you're married to someone who's dyslexic or whether you have a child who's dyslexic, is that dyslexia is not about just reading. It's not about seeing things backwards or seeing words backwards. It is an entirely different way of organizing the brain. And people who are dyslexic see the world in a different way than people who are neurotypical. And it's not like people who are dyslexic, we need to change them to fit into our world. That's like putting a square peg into a round hole. It's not going to happen. But as parents, as spouses, as friends, our job is to rearrange our world so that people who are dyslexic or have processing disorders, auditory processing disorder, deficiencies in reading, that kind of thing, can be successful. That's on us. That's not on them. That's on us to do that. So I want to tell you how you can arrange your world to make these people successful. And you might wonder, why are you think you're so qualified to talk about this? Well, I'm just sharing from my experience. I'm not a professional, like dyslexia therapist or something, but I have a lot of experience. Way back a long time ago, I was Title I director for an entire district, and that means that you go to all these specialized trainings for kids who are behind in reading and math, and you have to learn all these different curriculums and all these techniques and stuff to help them and implement those programs in your district. So I did that. Then I taught for 12 years, but the most significant way that I learned about this was about, I would say, 4 years ago. I started realizing that my youngest daughter was struggling and with reading. And it wasn't like she couldn't read. She could read fine in some ways, but her issue was spelling. And I started saying to myself, something is not right. Something's wrong. And so I took her for an SST, a student study team, and they were like, oh, she just needs reading tutoring. And I'm like, no, I've been teaching her how to read for forever. She's homeschooled. She's in second or third grade, and she couldn't spell the word was, but she could read an entire book. So it had to start me thinking a little about and researching about dyslexia. There's different kinds of dyslexia, if you didn't know, but what I found out is that I love it because it's actually a very unique way of seeing the world, and there's a lot of advantages that can be. At first I was upset that they would never consider it a disability. You will never see dyslexia on an IEP or a special ed document because it can't be diagnosed. You can't get a blood test and go, oh, you have dyslexia. But you can have symptomatic diagnoses, and they also call it a lot of other names like auditory processing disorder, processing disorders, phonemic deficiency. I can't even think of all. There's a billion of them. You can look up other names for dyslexia. There's a ton of them. So you will never see dyslexia on a document for an official school document because they don't consider it a disability. But it is real, and it's just the way of organizing the brain. And we have to, as neurotypicals, organize our world so that they can be successful. So here's a few of the things I wanted to talk about. So it's up to us to adjust, and especially as parents or spouses or friends, you need to understand these things. So number one, let's talk about the area of speaking. It's got to be challenging because a lot of times people with dyslexia have a tendency to choose a word that sounds like the word they're trying to say. So for instance, if Livy knows there's a mushroom there, like one time she was calling it a marshmallow, even though it was very similar in the sounds, she knew what she was trying to say, but instead she said marshmallow instead of mushroom. Or she'll say, like one time she said, she was trying to say, will you give me a noogie? But she said, will you give me a wedgie? Like, it's just very similar, or it happens all the time. But, I love that she always comes up with different ways to say things too. Like she said the other day, I have an acne bubble. But that's part of it. People who have dyslexia are often very creative. They see the world in a completely unique way. But expressing themselves verbally can be a challenge sometimes because they're having to draw from the different areas of their brain and put it together and coming out. Even my husband was saying yesterday, sometimes I say something and it comes out and it's not even words. So here's what we need to do as neurotypicals. We need to be patient. Don't be pressing your child, be like, come on, what do you say? What are you trying to say? Give them the time to breathe. Give them the time to process, giving them time to think of the right words, and that is going to help them be able to express themselves better. Because as soon as that pressure starts, then they'll start going like, I can't get it out. So we need to be patient, and we also need to be patient, and this comes down to listening as well. You know, one thing I used to do wrong was if somebody asked me, like Damien asked me, how do you spell this word? I would be like, XYZ, da, 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 da. You know, because most neurotypical people could follow that and write that. One thing I realized is that I have to slow down as the speaker and then the listener. I have to slow down. So like yesterday, Livy, we were talking about how to spell this word. So I started R-E-Q-U, and she's like, wait, Mom, I'm back at R. And I was like, okay, we need to spell it R-E, and you wait, Q-U. And that is just giving her a chance to do that. Now, let's apply it to grown-up world. Contact information, giving your contact information. One of the things that's hardest for Damien is when people go, my number is 909-767, blah, 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 blah. And he's like way back at the 9. And so if you're giving your contact information or you're speaking auditorily aloud to someone who has dyslexia, or an auditory processing disorder, they need the time to process. So be patient in the way that you speak. Give them time to process. Let's see, Lorraine said, I believe I have dyslexia to agree. I don't know if it's related to being a lefty. Oh, maybe so, yeah. Well, let's check it out. Let's see, here's some of the, you can also look it up online, the adult symptoms of dyslexia. Okay, so listening. Oh yeah, I did write that down. Oh, also for speaking, don't pressure someone with dyslexia to read out loud. If someone wants to pass, if they're reading a Bible verse out loud, if they're reading their lesson out loud, and they're not feeling comfortable, let them pass, because if you have dyslexia, reading out loud in front of a group is one of the hardest things that you will ever do. It is so stressful, and so, because you're gonna probably make mistakes, you might say things wrong, you might not be able to read a word, and it's so highly stressful. So if you have someone who has dyslexia in your family or in your classroom, don't pressure them to read out loud. That's one thing that we can do as well. Okay, so that we talked about speaking, listening. When they're listening to you, slow down. Don't throw out numbers and letters and addresses and stuff like that. Just speak a little bit slower. Directions. If you're giving directions to someone who has dyslexia, don't give multi-step directions. You need to break it down into small pieces. When they're an adult, it's probably fine because they've learned how to do that. But as a child, multi-step directions are a recipe for disaster. Because by the time you've gotten through the first one, then they're like, oh, on to the next thing, you know, without even doing the other 2 or 3. So single step directions are going to work best. Opposites. So one thing that's very common with dyslexics, and doesn't have to do with seeing the word backwards or anything, but it's that they commonly mix up opposites. You know, Livy's going into 6th grade and she still gets, you know, fast forward and rewind and the front yard and the backyard, you know, confused in her words. She's not confused in the concept, but the words come out all mixed up. Left and right. So if you're an adult and you're trying to do directions, and my friend Nellie brought it up this morning because she is struggling with directions, you know, you need to be patient in the way that you're explaining left and right. With Livy, I always make sure, okay, now do you know which way left or right is? Show me which your hand is, because opposites can be very confusing. And part of the reason for that, and this is what is next, is it has to do with memorizing. So the way that dyslexic people, their brain is structured, they don't memorize rote facts. So rote means like no attachment, you know, just like, you know, 5 times 9 is 45, very well. So what they have to do their brain does not store those rote facts without a solid place to hang them. So if you are helping someone to study for a test, your high schooler who struggles with processing disorder is studying for a biology test, and you've got to remember all these vocabulary terms, they're not going to memorize them without a ton of work. And one way that you can do it is give them a structure to kind of hang that fact on, even multiplication facts or history dates. We were talking about this yesterday because I was telling Damien, oh, here's what I'm going to do. And he goes, oh my gosh, memorizing history dates, that's the worst thing in the world. Random facts do not stick. That's why you're not going to give somebody who has dyslexia a spelling test, because they will spell the same word 3 different times on the same page. I'm guaranteeing it, especially when they're children. When they're adults, you have coping skills and you've learned how to cope with all that. Don't ask someone who's dyslexic to memorize a random fact. Help them find a structure to hang that random fact on so that they can internalize it and keep it in there and have a place. Okay, next I wanted to talk about expressing ideas. Oh my gosh, if you've ever talked to someone who has dyslexia, processing disorder, they have amazing ideas. Livy, some of the ideas she comes up with, like to paint or to talk about, they're incredible. But if I was to say to her, I want you to sit down and write these all out, the ideas are going to disappear right in front of me, because the process of writing them out and trying to spell everything right and all of that is painstaking. So if you have somebody who's dealing with that, let them get their ideas out first. So for Livy, we talk about it, but she types, she's going to 6th grade, but she types, and she does so much better typing than writing. But there's grammar errors, there's spelling errors. I don't care. Just put them down on paper, let them go, and then we'll go back, then we'll edit, then we'll organize. Just put the paper down, put it down on paper. And for Damien, one example with this would be our Christmas cards. So for our clients at Christmas time, he has all these brilliant things he wants to say, but if I asked him, would you sit down and write out this Christmas card, it would be like, Happy Christmas. XO. Love Damien. So what we do, we team up. So he talks, I write the card, but he's just dictating what he wants to say, and it's like a great message and happy, encouraging, and blessing and all of this, and then I just write it out, because for me that's not a problem to write it out. But if I asked him to write it out, he would never get the message out. So that's my encouragement to you, is let your people around you who may have dyslexia or whatever, let them express their ideas without worrying about writing it, because that is the hardest thing to do, is to get it out of that little pencil. It also with dysgraphia, same thing. Another fact about people who have dyslexia is they often experience illness intensely, which I didn't know until I started doing all this research. So for instance, Livy got mono a couple of years ago. Mono in children usually presents as a cold, and the people that we were around, they had a cold. But when Livy got it, she had like golf balls here. Her eyes were swollen shut. It took like 6 weeks to recover. And that's just one example of how they will often experience illnesses and things like that intensely, which I had no idea before I started doing all this research. And the last one is to consider the environment. What my dyslexics in my family study with when they're trying to get something done is auditory distractions, so noises, and also visual distractions that keep them from doing things. So if you're homeschooling and you have a kid that you're trying to get to do their homework, or you're homeschooling, don't have a child screaming in the other room and have the TV on and that. Damien literally has to shut his office door and turn out all the distractions, everything, so that he can focus. And that's what I have to do for Livy. Like with homeschooling, is I have to make sure there's no other distractions. As soon as I start doing something, she's going to get distracted, because 80% of people who have dyslexia also have ADD. And it also is highly hereditary. If one of the parents has it, then there's 80% chance that one of the children is going to have it. The children are going to have it. So we have Miranda does it, Livy does, Damien does. So those are a couple of facts about it. So keeping noise and visual stimuli to a minimum. Some of the things that can help with that our movement. So you've seen, Livy has a bouncy chair on her seat. So you've seen kids doing school on the balls. That helps a lot because they're getting all that energy out on the exercise ball. Also, we have bungee cords strapped to the bottom of her chair so she can bounce her feet while she's doing that. That helps. Music seems to help, even though I just said noise can be a distractor. That background music seems to help a lot. So, and the movement helps, that helps her be able to focus. So all I want to leave with you is to say that we need to adjust our environments. Hopefully that helps you learn something about dyslexia that you might not know. Hopefully that helps a parent out there that's going like, what is wrong with my kid? And that was the worst thing I said to Livy is like one day we had been studying bones for like 2 or 3 weeks and she couldn't remember one single bone. And I was just like, I said, what is wrong with you? And then I was like, I didn't know that something was going on, and it was just like the worst thing. I feel so bad about that still, but it can be frustrating when you don't realize that there's something behind these actions. So I hope that helps somebody out there to realize like, hey, maybe this is all tied in together, or like maybe this is just part of it and I need to adjust, because that's the thing as parents and spouses and friends is we need to adjust our world. We're not going to make them fit into a neurotypical world because they're not going to. It's the brain. It's the way the brain works. Oh, good. Maybe my son has it too. I'll check on those tips. Good. Yeah, it's the way that the brain works. We're not going to change it. If you're looking for a therapy for dyslexia, what we used, and this is not a paid program for them, but what we used is something called Lexercise. And what it is Orton Gillingham is really the only therapy that's been proved to help kind of sort of rewire the brain for reading in dyslexia. And you have to do it every day and it's over time and all of this stuff. And so, Orton Gillingham is really the only one. There's a few programs that are based off of it, all about reading, all about spelling. Those are common homeschool curriculums that are based off of OG. And then also what we use, Lexercise. Hey, be quiet. And that is an online program. It was pretty expensive then, but I hear there's a package for like $99 a month where you get to work with a therapist. So Tara said, so good, absolutely painful for Xander to write his thoughts. Yeah. However, his thoughts are brilliant and I appreciate his brain. Yes, and how it works. Yeah, once we adjusted as parents and realized he didn't fit in the box, he flourished. That's right, girl. We had to change, not them. So anyway, thank you so much. I love you all. Go live your big, amazing, beautiful lives and share this with somebody who has a struggling reader and they're like, what is going on? I need some help. So hopefully that'll help somebody. Love you all. Mwah! Bye.